welcome back to another episode of the 706 podcast where we discuss, debate, and argue about which movies belong in a list of the 706 greatest films of all time. After last week's discussion of Winona Ryder and her monocle and Heathers, we're pulling back just over a decade to a different genre entirely, to 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, directed by Philip Kaufman. So Invasion of the Body Snatchers itself, a kind of remake of a film of the same name from the 50s, which was itself based on a book, is the type of film whose kind of narrative has been remade quite a number of times. But just before we go around and introduce ourselves, I'll just quickly give the synopsis, which it is the story, of course, about an invasion that takes the form of people who look, just like us, this sort of human invasion, I guess you could say. But without giving anything away, we'll go around and just say hi. So I'm the host today, Anthony, and we are Tony. You want to start?
Sure. Hey guys, I'm Tony's pod. Tony's dead, and I'm the new Tony. So hi.
There you go. My name's Kiefer. I am very excited to talk about my esteemed, prolific father in this episode. I have 24 minutes to do so, and I'll take it from there. Actually, my name's Kurt.
And last but not least, perfect. All right. So let's see. We'll switch it up. We'll do Tony first, for instance. Tony, on the scale of transit to Mishima, what do you think?
This is not quite a Mishima, but it's much closer to Mishima. These last few guys, I don't know. I've been on, I feel like I've been on a cold streak here. The past couple, I've been like, I enjoyed them, but they're kind of like whatever. You get Invasion of the Body Snatchers and pow, kaplam, Batman, 60s Batman sound effects. This movie, it's a banger. It's a true banger. And I don't say that about every movie I enjoy, but this is just like, it just hit the spot. It was just perfect. It's like an early version of, and I'm sure people have made this comparison, but it's almost like a forerunner to like The Thing, The Blob, and The Fly, like the 80s kind of gory remakes of the 50s kind of cheesy sci-fi horror films. This is like the first one of those. And I think it holds its own with those for sure. This is a movie that from the get-go is just so tense, so brilliantly and tastefully directed. There's so many brilliant choices in the way we see these weird forms, these weird, almost aquatic shapes moving around. And then we see the plants and we see a slowly growing like vine or veins on a plant. And it's just like, it's really kind of gross almost, but also it looks genuinely, I'll say, first of all, practical effects in this movie, some of the best ever, like on par with The Blob and The Thing and The Fly, on par with all those movies. That's like part of what makes them these, as part of this kind of little era, is the great practical effects. But what's so great about these in particular is they're very convincingly biological. They look like a real organism, a real creature, but it also looks alien. And it's delightfully gross. Like the whole movie's so gross, but in exactly the way it's supposed to be. And just like when Donald Sutherland smashes his own pod's head open, I said, yes, like this is what I wanted. When the dog man shows up, when the dog with the human head shows up, I'm like, oh my God, this is great. Because I was not expecting that. That came out of nowhere. I love when he kicks the pod next to the homeless guy and his dog and it belches out blood. It's so disgusting. And then it creates I don't know. That stuff was all great, but this movie isn't like a splatter fest. It's not like a gore movie. It's not like a cheesy monster movie. And it's not like all about the like money shots, the like effects money shots. Like they're in there and they're very striking. They're very memorable. That's probably what people remember when they talk about this movie. But really this movie is a very deliberately paced, very methodical kind of 70s thriller. It's almost like a conspiracy thriller. And you got like just the long shots in just like the house. Like there's this amazing shot very early where Elizabeth is at home with her boyfriend, Jeff. I believe it's Jeff. And they're talking in their bedroom. And you can see Jeff in the mirror or reflected. And then we're just got a shot down the hallway. Camera's just like zooming in. And it's just it's perfect, like just horror direction, because nothing menacing is happening in this scene. There's nothing scary going on, but that zoom is so ominous. And the other touch that I think is so great, and maybe I missed like how this ties back in. They probably explain this, but I didn't remember how it did. But I actually like that because it's so creepy, unexplained, is the shots throughout of the garbage trucks and crushing these like gray like material. And I guess those are the pods being thrown away, but like I almost thought like, are those the
Human
bodies?
remains.
Yeah,
bodies.
it was the bodies.
Ashes. Yeah.
Ashes. Okay. Yeah. And it's really, and like immediately we kind of get that. Like immediately think, I'm like, oh my God, they're throwing away the bodies. And it's like really disturbing. But it's not gory. You can put it, this movie's rated PG, which, you know, it wouldn't be PG today, let's say. But still, the fact that this movie can suggest so much and show so little makes it all the more creepy. And I don't know. I'm sure there's some big political metaphor here that's very obvious that I'm not getting. Obviously, you have the conspiracy, paranoia of the 70s, the idea that the authorities can't be trusted and we're told to deny the evidence of our eyes and ears in favor of some pre-established narrative. And that's very vague, kind of just paranoia. I don't know what specifically it's really referring to. I'm sure there's something. And yeah, I mean, I thought the score was great. I mean, again, I complained about the score last week with Heathers, but this is an example of a score for a movie from like not the same era, but kind of a roughly similar era that I think has aged very well. I think it's very modern. It's very ahead of its time. It goes for the big piercing strings at the big shocker reveals, but there's also an unsettling kind of gurgle or a wub. I wrote down at one point, wub, 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 like an almost like techno wub, or almost something you'd hear today in like an A24 movie or like Under the Skin or something, you know, just great. So in short, movie's full of really inspired choices, excellent performances. Of course, Donald Sutherland, amazing all-timer performance, great reactions. Jeff Goldblum. Yes, Jeff Goldblum is and he's so tiny, he's so thin, he's like a stick. Anyway, big fan, and I'll pass it off.
All right, that was interesting. I think that may be one of the most favorable reactions I've ever garnered out of Tony for one of my movies. So yeah, I was somewhat surprised, of course, but glad at the end of the day. So Connor, you picked this film last week to sort of get us out of a groove, to kind of throw us into a sort of different genre for once, and to kind of switch things up. So what did you think?
No, I'm glad to get away from the highfalutin stuff, all the politics. You know, I don't want any political discussion. Okay, no political discussion in this episode. Okay, I liked it for all of the reasons that Tony described. Obviously, the until now, right, and still, right, unsurpassed practical effects that are truly unsettling, right, truly disgusting. When you see the weird like web thing on their face, it kind of squirms. You didn't need to do that. You didn't need to make it squirm, but that little bit of extra texture, you know, to these practical effects, just it makes me a little sick, you know, which I've never quite had that feeling before. I don't have it with The Thing, right, which is more gory, sure, right, more that's fucked up, man. You know, obviously Alien 2 would be another from the year after this, right? Would be a similar movie in that vein, not a remake of a 50s movie. But yeah, no, incredibly striking practical effects, excellent score, right? That does feel very modern. I would say, right, I love the initial moments, the suspense. Robert Duvall as a priest on a swing. And you see from his point of view, which is another thing of the use of the camera I could mention, right? The use of handheld, which was kind of interesting, and kind of whip pans and this kind of thing. To some extent, right? Not quite abused as we've seen it, right, in the earlier 70s, but they seem to know exactly when to use this erratic camera movement. And obviously the photography overall, super compelling, very classically done. People knew what they were doing, right, when they did this, and it creates the suspense, creates this unsettling quality, creates also, right, this texture that draws you in. Okay. But I would say that towards the middle of the movie, after we get over the initial discoveries of what these aliens are, what they do, it kind of drags. It certainly drags in kind of the middle section when they're in the house. You start to ask the questions, how did no one notice these pods? They're very conspicuous, these pods, right? These things have to grow out of plants, right? These bodies, right? There's something so far-fetched about this. Of course, right, we can buy into the somewhat cheesy premise, right? But those are the questions I started asking myself as the movie kind of slowed down in the middle. Eventually, we get to the point where all the cards are on the table. There's nothing more to reveal. Leonard Nimoy, right? appears as a double. Then you ask yourself, like, well, what did they never think of this before? Why are they surprised that he's now one of the doubles or one of the body snatchers? You start to think kind of like, I get it, movie. I get what this is, right? You move past where the movie is in terms of the information that's being presented. Now, I love how the movie ends, which I don't know how to compare this to the original film, but I'm curious. I imagine they are taking it a step further, right? Not just the concept of, well, what if some of the people around you, right, are body snatchers, are these fake people? What if everyone is? And then you have to pretend, right? You're the weird one. That kind of twist on the premise, right, is super interesting. And they go there, but only at the very end. And I wish almost they had spent more time just, what is it like to be in this world as the only two people, right? Or only three people who still, right, have a mind of their own, and how would they get along, right, in this scenario? So I found it kind of a little boring, I would say, or a little bit predictable in the middle portion, but who can fault that wonderful, subversive, shocking ending, right? I have a lot of admiration for that ending, but I guess that's all I would say. So I like it quite a bit. I wouldn't say it's knocked my socks off, but yeah, certainly it's in the grand tradition of those practical effects, 70s, 80s movies. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So you get your shoes off. Your socks are still on, though. And you went.
Yeah, the shoes are definitely off. I would say the shoes came off.
All right. So, Kurt, you're keeping us waiting. We got to hear it. What do you have to say?
This movie is one of the worst films no, it's not bad. It's a fine film. It's a fine film. It's a genre movie, right? I have to keep reminding myself that it's playing by these constraints, I guess, voluntarily, which I can fault it for, because I feel like it had the opportunity to progress, or actually it had the opportunity to continue what it built in the first two acts or the first half of the movie. Instead, it regressed. So I'm sharing some of the opinions of Connor, some of the viewpoints. Let's start with the positives. For me, largely overlapping. I think the practical effects are second to none. I really love the kind of the viscera that you see, right? We don't know what it's like, half plant, half human, half alien, half and I love that. It's so nebulous, right? That it's unsettling. I love how what is it called? It's like almost a stop motion effect, because they couldn't really animate it. It's for the blossoming of the flowers. That's so cool. It's so well done. And I think really this movie is brilliantly shot and directed as well. I think, there's certain shots, like a shot that sticks with me is when Donald Sutherland's character is sneaking into the house on Postcard Row, Elizabeth's house, and he comes up the basement and he sticks his head out, and it's like a vertical shot, but it's like disorienting at the same time because the floor is vertical as well. So it's like it's on the side, and then it kind of slowly repositions. I thought that was really cool. Just really elegant is the word that came to mind. And there's an elegance here. And I think San Francisco offers a nice little playground for a director. We see it in other movies like Bullet. Isn't Bullet in San Francisco or no? Yeah. And then of course Dirty Harry, and you have more modern ones, Zodiac, whatever. Obviously Milk is a movie that comes to mind.
The Room, obviously. Yeah.
The Room, of course, those beautiful shots of the skyline. But the movie is really great in the beginning. And I think where I was most invested was right after the book signing or the book meeting, where Leonard Nimoy's character is he's triaging Elizabeth, and he's trying to help her synthesize what her emotions are, what her reactions are, and kind of engage in some reality testing with her. And through almost like a little bit of leading questions, reframing, redirection, and ultimately it's all about reality testing. But I thought it was really cool. He's saying that this is some sort of hallucinogenic flu, and that kind of concept in my head is very cool to me. I think that's a premise that I would love to see. You know, I like the psychological aspects really more than I like the idea of the bodies being switched. I don't know if that makes any sense. I like the idea that someone is not who they pretend to be or who they are presented as. They're a double more than I like the actual mechanisms of the pods and the alien aspect of it. It just feels more provocative. You know, like Tony mentioned, paranoia. I love the paranoia that sets in, and you're like, oh man, who is to be trusted in this situation? You obviously know some twists are coming. You know, there's going to be plenty of doubles that aren't known to be doubles. And you know, when he's on the phone with all these various agencies, I thought it was very clever that it's like, is this just typical bureaucratic indolence or is this actual like malfeasance, right? And that's kind of cool. That's a nice little like satirical jab there. I was going to just say that my biggest qualm with the film is the last third or the last, I don't know, half, I guess. Once they're in the house, like Connor, it's like, what can happen here? What's the end game in this film, or even the intimation of an end game? Like, I don't need the humans to win, right? But in every single movie that I've seen regarding aliens versus humans, there's at least a chance. And when there's no chance, there's no real stakes because you know they're gonna die. You know, they're at any point past like 45 minutes into the movie, do you think any of these people have any chance of living? I don't. And that kind of lowers the stakes for me. And then it turns into like this Walking Dead episode where they're just running around. You know, Donald Sutherland needs just a crossbow to like fire back at the Screechers. You know, it just feels like a zombie, like George Romero bullshit. You know, I'm being very hard and also sardonic right now, but that's how I feel a little bit. It's just like wasted potential, and it aggravates me because I don't think we need those pursuits. We're not learning anything, folks. Can you at least throw in like a fucking alien queen that's on Alcatraz Island and we don't have to go kill her, but like, oh, she's over there, or like we find out there's a fail safe or like a switch on the back of the pods that'll blow them all up. But it's hopeless. Maybe that's me talking in the middle of a pandemic, but I'm like, oh yeah, they're fucked. Like there's no coming back. And then I guess the dread is supposed to just kind of, the vibes are supposed to just take you through, and they do. This is a great movie. It really is. It's a really good movie. It's a progenitor in the space. It's a classic, right? It really is a classic. It's one of those movies where I've seen images from it, but I've never seen the movie, and that's how iconic it is, you know, it's just like at the end, Donald Sutherland like pointing. I've seen that image, but I never was able to contextualize it. Now I can. So it's really cool, Anthony. I'm glad you showed it to us. Just a little qualm with, and I'd like to hear what you all think, or I guess we'll hear what Anthony, why he picked the movie. But you know, I just feel like the end, like we need some more stakes. And maybe is that a fault of the genre? I'm not sure, but that's my thought.
All right, that was interesting, Kirk. I'm sure we'll all have our own thoughts and ideas about, you know, some of your remarks too. But I think I found very interesting is how you, Kirk, and Connor both had kind of issues, and that like where you wish the movie kind of went, or where the movie did go, and what you thought could have perhaps provided a more interesting narrative. That's kind of interesting in and of itself. But before we go into kind of a more discussion, kind of why I picked it and what I'm thinking about when I decided on this movie is like, I think one thing we got to get out of the way is, of course, is like the storyline and the narrative, The Body Snatchers itself, of course. It originates technically from a novel by Jack Finney in the 1950s called The Body Snatchers. And I really think that it's fascinating how Jack Finney writes this kind of pulpy novel, and it really, I think, would become one of the most influential genre works like since that time. It is fascinating how many versions of this movie there are, how many other versions of this movie you've probably seen in some form or another, whether it's a video game, TV, or whatever, you know, adapted in all sorts of ways by both high and low, you know, directors and artists in between. But I think the other side too is if Twitter existed in 1978 when this movie came out, every year we'd probably see an article that said, this movie is prescient, insert current political situation or whatever. That is just so true. You know, I'm sure back then, as Tony was kind of saying, There was probably the political relevance of the paranoia, the leftover feelings of Watergate. Today, there's probably an environmental, ecological reading of the movie. All sorts of things. There was probably a Reagan-esque type reading of the movie. It just sticks so well. And yes,
Immigration.
there are moments that probably date it, but I think overall, as sort of a, in its philosophy and in its kind of characterizations and portrayals of these situations, very human, it endures and kind of lasts. But as for me, I think in kind of watching it, and what really gets me going is I will agree with Connor in that it kind of meanders at points, and even you, Kirk. But I think for me is when I first saw this movie, I was going through a sort of sci-fi kick, and I kind of wasn't really getting what I needed. And all of a sudden I saw this, and like Tony, I felt kicked out of my seat. Like, how do you describe it? Kablam! 1960s Batman. I was just floored instantly, and I absolutely loved it. From Donald Sutherland's performance as a health inspector to Brooke Adams in this kind of sort of role as a sort of scientist, inspector or whatever. But anyway, as I watch this movie, I think one thing that fascinates me to start is, of course, San Francisco, as Kirk was saying. San Francisco in this time, the leftover, the 1960s and hippie kind of movement, really lends itself to an amazing atmosphere like New York does at that time. And I love going back and kind of seeing this here. But as a movie on its own, to get into the kind of grip and the themes of it, I also don't necessarily have this grand political reading of it. But I think there's something fascinating today in the way I think about it, which is the way it presents us of how we kind of organize society. When we really see how society is organized, when we really see it on the clearest, most fundamental level, when we could pull back and see our emotions taken away from it, we realize it's fundamentally strange, it's horrifying, and it's scary. But that's what we have. And what I think the movie, and the way I'd kind of rescue it, Kirk, is I'd say it has to be bleak, Kirk, because that movie would have no other honest ending. It has to kind of end that way because it is nihilistic. And to recognize all this stuff is nihilistic. But I think if there's an out, I think, and this maybe hopefully would address some of maybe Connor's complaints, if there's an out, it lies in the kind of the beginning of the film, which I agree is the most interesting part when that paranoia is hitting. And it's the way we often treat hysteria, female hysteria, of course. And this is one of my usual type readings of movies, I think. But the movie really gives us the kind of feminine space as this idea. What would have happened, right, if we just listened to the feminine answer of recognizing that these people aren't who they are? The two women at the start, Brooke Adams and her husband, Jeff, and that other woman at the bookstore, and also the kind of lower working people who are the first to recognize things are all off. The person at the laundromat and stuff like that. There's a truly kind of working and female relationship to what eventually becomes this disaster. And what happens is if we rid ourselves of that complete female energy, we only have the emotionalist husk that we are, and that we are in this kind of almost capitalistic, you might say, or just at least American society, which is destructive, which is awful, and which is, to recognize it is just unnatural and horrific. So I really think that's kind of the way I see this kind of movie, and I kind of appreciate it in that sense. And maybe I'm too generous, or maybe I'm too much applying my own ideas and interests onto it. But I mean, the movie almost lends itself to that, I think. But enough of what I'm saying. We'll kind of go in, I think, to the movie. And I think I don't really have anything planned out, but I got to start because we all mentioned it with the ending itself. Kirk, you described it as recognizable. You've seen it online or whatever, but that ending of Donald Sutherland holding the finger, and that trope of the silent scream, the hushed and then the scream involves. It's such a great moment. But what did you think, Tony? How did you feel about that moment? And what did you think about
I loved it. I thought it was, as far as last shots go, as just in terms of movies we've done on the podcast, it's up there with Inception. I think it's a great gesture. It's just one of those events that is just instantly iconic. And I use that word a lot, but it's like, what does it mean? I'm not sure, but it's like, it when you see it. And that's just it's just a moment that's sticky. It's a moment that just, you remember, that you just think of like, oh yeah, like it becomes a meme basically. If it can become a meme, that means it's iconic basically, because it gets repeated and referenced a lot. But I love that moment because I think the ending, the last bit is so interesting because it's like you start off, and I think Connor almost alluded to this idea that he actually is still himself and he's just trying to kind of fit in with the pod. I assumed that he was turned into a pod watching it. And I think that's the most obvious takeaway from the last shot. But what's interesting about it is that it almost doesn't matter, because if you're acting like a pod, if the pods have won, if the pods run society and you play by their rules and you live the life they want you to live, who cares if you're a pod or not? Okay, you have your autonomy, you have your consciousness, you are yourself. But I think the movie's arguing like you really aren't. Like the self is more than that. It's actually a really interesting kind of philosophical question. I think the end of the movie poses like, what does it mean to be a person in society? And if we acquiesce, to go along with Anthony's reading, if we acquiesce to this violent, horrible society and we just live our lives kind of unobtrusively and go along with it, are we human or are we pods? You know, and I think that's kind of cool.
Are we dancers? Only the killers know.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great start, Tony, because the other fundamental philosophical question here too is what they're replacing is literally just us. It's the same society without the emotion, right? Like you're going back and like the workday's still happening for Matthew's character. And that's also interesting, you know, too. This isn't an invasion to like put their own sense of culture necessarily on things. It's to replace our culture with a more organized, better version of it, a more efficient version in a way. So also, like, where's the human in that? Where do we fit the human in that?
What Tony said is exactly what I would say about the ending. Yeah, the brilliance of it. I mean, I think it's just this purely for that ride that it takes you on, right? In terms of your expectations, that you've thought this out, right? That, well, okay, if I were this person, I'm living this pod life, I'd be waiting just for that one moment where someone said to me, you know, I'm a person too, right? And then when that moment comes, then you realize that you were wrong, you know, but because you've already gotten yourself to that place, you know exactly what it means when she comes up to him at the end, right? I just love it on that level of just pure playing with the audience expectations. I think the question is deep, right? What would it mean? I mean, I think, you know, obviously fundamentally, right, you could live this way somehow. I guess what Anthony raises is the question of, you know, I don't know really what the stakes are, and I'm not sure exactly of the mechanics in the universe of the movie, right? Because, okay, right, Leonard Nimoy's argument, we don't know if it's true or not. He's a pod at this point, right? He argues that somehow your consciousness will be uploaded. Is the pod person essentially you? Is your consciousness somehow uploaded to the pod person?
I think there's a continuity. Basically, your life would continue just as a pod, and you'd remember your memories and stuff.
Yeah, you remember your memories. Okay. Yeah. So I hadn't quite thought along those lines, you know.
So you're going to take the pod's word for it? You know, Tony, you're acting a little suspicious this episode. I got to say, you're trying to convince us of these things.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it is an ambiguity, I guess, right? He could be trying to lull them into but I think that kind of works though, because it's like, there's no way we can know, right? Until you become a pod, you wouldn't know. And if it's like dying, like you can't know until it happens. And then once it's happened, it's like you can tell anybody. So, you know.
All you know is to defy the pod.
Mm-hmm.
That's to defy the pod people, right? That's kind of your only choice in that case, right? You can't know if they're being sincere or not, so you have to kind of cut their little speech short, right, and just knock them over on the head with a glass bottle or whatever, right?
Part of the fear too, right? And this is a very small stakes of the film, but it happens with Elizabeth and her husband in the movie, which is, isn't there something just extremely terrifying? And I think this is the thing that resonated with Kirk, if I heard that right, isn't there's something extremely terrifying about realizing that the person that you're next to all of a sudden isn't that person, and that the emotional aspects which really connect you, it's not necessarily the memories, but it's the emotional side that resonates you. It's the desire, it's the reactions. That's gone. And isn't that terrifying and like worrying to see lost in the rest of humanity?
I think what really is terrifying to me, and this actually ties into 45 years, is something I was reminded of while watching this film, is, you know, our methods of communication and mutual understanding are quite archaic or insufficient, right? Like we can't possibly understand divergent perspectives fully. We all live in our own world. We're in a snow flurry trying to understand smoke signals hundreds of miles away. You know what I mean? Like there's so much static. There's so much in between us. And we're really just trying to pick up the pieces. So to me, the idea is not so much that the person perhaps is any further away than they were. Maybe the more profound thing for me, and this is, I don't know, probably lame, but the idea is that recognizing that they were never close to begin with. So that's kind of the idea, is like, oh, well, really there is no hope of connection in this world. And that's like the ultimate existential terror that really latches on to my reptilian brain and pulls on the adrenaline. But I just wanted to say, it's really well done in the beginning. I think Peter Dinklage does a great job, first of all, of gaining 18 inches, or what is 2 feet probably. Second of all, he looks great for being 75. And third of all, I really love the scene where she's tailing him. She's tailing him throughout the city. And it's so unsettling for some reason to see people come up to junctures and then leave with other people. It's like transgressive, right? Like somehow it breaks our like social mores. Like seeing that kind of fluidity was really like irksome, and like, but more so just unsettling and gross is a word.
It's an amazing sequence, because again, it's like the first part of the movie, what it does so successfully is it shows you things that by themselves are not creepy or not scary. There's nothing wrong with this guy meeting some people in like a lobby of a building. Like that's literally all we're seeing, but it feels extremely uncomfortable. Like there's something really like off about it and creepy. And I'm not sure how they quite do it. I think there's zooms, maybe the music, but like it conveys that feeling of dread, or maybe it's just the context of the story, but those scenes are just so full of dread. And I think that's so impressive the way it does it. I also love the progression of this kind of invasion, like the way it happens, like kind of in the background. Like we're seeing it on the ground level. We're seeing it from like a person, like an ant's eye view, and everything's happening around them. And we don't get a lot of like context. Like there's no scene. We get a little with Leonard Nimoy, like in the middle of like, oh, you'll be reborn anew or whatever. But you never get some like big speech from like the alien queen, as Kirk said, about like, this is our plan, and then after Earth we'll take Mars, and after Mars Zeltron 6, and then we'll like, there's nothing like that. It's just like, because we would never get access to that. It's just how we would experience an alien invasion, which is just like a bunch of creepy stuff happening, and very, very slowly things change, and then everything changes all at once. Or it could be how you would experience like a military coup in your country, where a democratically elected government is overthrown or something, where things are just happening little by little, things aren't quite right, and then all of a sudden everything is different. And I think this, better than almost any other movie, conveys that idea of like, this is what it would be like to live through an alien invasion. This is what it would actually feel like. You wouldn't be Bruce Willis in the Starfighter blowing up a globule or a metal orb. That wouldn't be how it would be. You would be hiding in a basement, terrified, trying to reassure your girlfriend that humans will actually win, knowing that that's impossible. And that's what I like. I like that bleakness. I like the inevitability of the progression of this plot. It's like a nightmarish inevitability. I love when they get in the cab and there's like a checkpoint with the police stopping them, and they immediately know, and we immediately know what's going on. Like to me, it feels incredibly like nightmarish in a true sense,
So we got to say a few things then, since the way that Kirk and Tony brought up. One, the taxi driver is our old friend Don Siegel, director of Dirty Harry and Child, and also director of the original version from the 50s of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then two, I think Kirk really hit on something though too, is the eeriness and uncanniness of that first scene where Elizabeth describes all the encounters that she can't quite understand, that aren't creepy but are creepy. Because isn't that also like the fundamental part of the movie is routine itself, right? Routine is so normalized, but it's also extremely weird if you really come to think about it. But, and I could say this on a personal level, is like, take for instance, like, like my girlfriend or something, like, especially pre-pandemic, of course, like if she was going to work, I have this image in my head of a routine that, whether it's extremely accurate or not, I don't know, but I have an image of a routine in my head. But the moment I hear from her that she did something else, all of a sudden, like, I feel a little weird. I'm like, wait, what'd you do? Like, how do I have to switch things around? And I think that's a tiny little like moment that the movie really latches onto. And pulls and pulls until it just becomes the most intensifying realization about the way we kind of like live and expect our lives to kind of function. And I think that's really well done. So I like the way you put that, Kirk. But the other thing I want to think about in terms of the movie is like, you know, we talked about the special effects and stuff in San Francisco, but the plants themselves and the vegetation, not just the claymation, but the look of it. They're most like the vaginal, like almost imagery of the film. You know, Connor, you brought up Alien, and you know, people always rave about that and like sort of womb-like structure of the ship. But I think it's here too. The flower when it hatches is like bleeding almost like a period when it's not quite, you know, able to hatch. So fascinating. And of course, Elizabeth when she pops up. And I kind of hate the movie for this a little, but I think it works on one thematic sense. When she pops up to kind of surprise Matthew, she has to be the one character, of course, naked, I guess. But it's again, it's sort of the rebirth Eve scene. And it's the most eerie thing when she walks into that factory and no one looks at her. There's no sense of desire on anyone. She just screams. And that's a really pulsating moment. But I mean, what did you guys think of some of the images and the environmental sides, not just San Francisco, not just the special effects, but what did you think of those flowers and the way they were? Were they just kind of annoyances for you, Kirk or Connor? Did they add anything to the movie?
I thought she had, you know, the breasts were fine. I mean, I wouldn't. Oh, images. Okay, the vegetation. You know, I'm sorry. That's my fault. That's my fault.
This is why we don't leave you in the final cut, Kirk.
Oh, okay. Now I know. You know, you're right. There's a feminine look to them, you know, if you were to assign a gender, right? But I think also there's an element where plants, you know, there's kind of, they abide by this law of nature. There's no real room for nuance, right? And so that, I think, contributes to the foreboding feeling, is like, this will just be a war of attrition, that they will not quit. They're going to overtake us, and they don't have many weaknesses, I guess. So that was cool. But yeah, the imagery is stark. I would use the word stark, especially in like the mud bath scene. That was pretty cool, like a throwback to kind of like something that wouldn't really exist nowadays in that form, at least in America. I mean, there are Turkish baths in New York, but not really like mud baths like that. And so that was pretty cool to see, like the bubbling and then the man sitting there, you know, reading. And, you know, it's just all those, it's an accumulation of these stark images on a bleak situation that really kind of, you know, prick the needle and ratchet up the tension. But what does Connor think?
Kirk, you speak of plants as this like primeval, unreasoning force, but plants have feelings too. But as we learn, they like to listen to music, right? To Anthony's question, I don't know what to make of the sort of the vaginal element, other than that, yeah, they give birth, so that's kind of appropriate. And I think there's kind of a horror aspect. There's a sort of unsettling aspect, right? I mean, when it first blooms, it's kind of beautiful, but also, right, fleshy, and that's unsettling. Then later, it is truly terrifying and very clearly, you know, sort of birth canal-like, and it gets more unsettling. Obviously, that's just great on just the practical effects level, and obviously, it was kind of an obsession. You think of, yeah, the Alien as well, right, from this time. This kind of creepy sexuality or central. Think of Videodrome, I think, for Cronenberg, right, would be the biggest one there. Anyway, but I wanted to bring up, if I could steer the conversation, you know, one thing that I do want to discuss are these other characters. For instance, right, our character who mentions that plants have feelings too, or for instance, Jeff Goldblum's character, or Leonard Nimoy too, who we've mentioned already. But all of these serve as kind of, you know, what do these characters mean? You know, the movie spends a lot of time setting up the actual life of these characters, which turns out to be important because we need to know, right, what goes wrong, right? Or we need to know, it needs to mean something to us when these routines change, obviously. But clearly it imbues the characters with some kinds of points of view, right? What does it mean for Donald Sutherland to be the health inspector? Well, it's kind of appropriate that he would be trying to investigate this. He's kind of a public servant, right? He's public-minded, he says at one point, right? And he's sort of in contrast to Jeff Goldblum's character, who is the frustrated poet, right? Who can't seem to get anyone to read his stuff, right? And I love the moment where Leonard Nimoy says, yeah, she asked, she was interested in your poems. And he immediately, the last thing we see of him is just him bolting towards wherever that lady was. And he could just get a little bit of attention, for his work. I think also the moment where we see Donald Sutherland in the mirror, he's calling in to report the case of the man who has gone paranoid and then been run over by a car, right? Clearly the body snatchers have caught on to the fact that he's catching on to them and they have killed him, right? He's going to report this, not thinking that it was an ordinary, accident, and he can't get through. Meanwhile, Jeff Goldblum is in the mirror, reflected behind him, nattering on about how this or that won't happen, or he can't get any attention, or he's complaining about all of the attention that Leonard Nimoy's character, this kind of hack, psychiatry writer, gets, right? I'm just curious what Anthony or anyone else made of these kind of point of view characters. What do they give us, right, in terms of how we approach this movie? Maybe not just on a plot level, but also on a thematic level.
Well, Nimoy's interesting because he's sort of this like weird. So here's what I was thinking. Here's the historical connection I made that I have no idea if this was intentional or not. There was a guy, Dr. Spock. Have you guys heard of Dr. Spock?
No.
So he was like a known like public person who wrote books on like child rearing at the time, kind of in the way that this guy's a famous psychiatrist who writes books about like getting in touch with yourself or like self-help books or whatever. He's like a pop psych guy. Dr. Spock was like a child rearing guru. So I wonder if that was like almost a nod. But the thing is, Dr. Spock became known later in his career for being a very vocal critic of the Vietnam War. And Dr. Spock was almost like in the same way Tom Hanks has gone from a beloved cultural figure to like this culture war, QAnon conspiracy victim or whatever. Dr. Spock had the same thing happen to him basically because he was this beloved guy. And then when he started saying the Vietnam War was bad, everyone like hated him, or the right hated him in America. Which is interesting because in this movie, he's almost the opposite. He's not the guy. He's like almost the more like quote unquote reasonable one who's like, no, there's no plant conspiracy. Everyone calm down. So it's not a quite perfect connection, but I do wonder if that was sort of a reference. But anyway.
Yeah. And the whole Leonard Nimoy, I think probably could be. Yeah. Something along those lines. I mean, he seemed to be a
known guy at this time. Like that. He was a famous guy. So.
It seemed to have been very witty with their casting, as we've seen with Don Siegel. Yes. And also I think the lead actor from the original Body Snatchers, I think appears in this as well.
Well, I will say real quick is I think to Tony's like connection, the kind of idea of pop psychology or pop, ideas, pop science, pseudoscience is all over the movie, especially though too. Because we see in the mud bath that guy who holds up the book, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's The Collision of Something, which is a very popular book at the time that speculated that the Earth was created out of a collision of planets. I can't remember which one, similar to like the Flat Earth conspiracy almost. Like it was like to that level, but it was a popular bestseller and stuff like that. And so there's all sorts of like logic here, but I think at the point is like, science doesn't really have the answers on any fundamental level in terms of a psychological rationality that Leonard Nimoy's character represents. And because he's wrong, of course, like when did he get switched? We don't know. Maybe he's just buying people into this thing though from the beginning when we see him, because he does display a bit more of a sort of character than the rest of the kind of aliens. But what else? I really think it's interesting that the last person we're left with is Nancy, the kind of the worker, who just is able to escape, able to adapt better than anyone else to really like pull things through. But she also probably didn't see this desperate need to blow up the little factory or shipyard. She's just able to blend in. And even when that dog appears, she just keeps on moving in that line, which is, something fascinating there, but I don't know what to make of it. But if anyone other than that had like, some final thoughts, we could also move into the voting, preserve some time.
Sure. I'll go ahead. So, there's something about it that doesn't quite reach the very high heights of some of the movies we've watched for this podcast. But as we talk about it, I'm sure there's more to discover as I think about it more. And I like what Anthony said at the beginning about just the kind of the beauty of the premise, right? Which I guess is not really to the movie's credit because the premise was already out there. But obviously, I think it set a standard for a certain kind of horror. It did, I think, a lot of justice to the premise, and and just so craftfully and thoughtfully done. I'd give it a soft yes.
No.
and I would like to crawl back into Donald Sutherland's mouth anytime.
All right. Thank you, Connor. I think that was a surprising soft turnaround, but all right, Kirk, let's see. Do you still wish there was a queen on Alcatraz that we could
I sure do, Anthony. And you can fault me for it, but I do wish there was some sort of there were some stakes in the latter part of the movie, and I know it's for thematic reasons, and I get it. I truly do. It's a personal preference, or maybe even just a product of my mood at the time. But I'll say two very quick things. I like that Leonard Nimoy is the psychiatrist who we have everybody else trying to convince the psychiatrist that they're not insane. That was very, I guess, on the nose, but at the same time, very cute. And I will say, my reading of this movie is Donald Sutherland is a homewrecker. It's intimated the whole movie. He's a homewrecker, and this is his way. This is his fever dream of actually getting to fuck Elizabeth. Like, this is the way. Like,
so it's a monkey's paw, Kirk. It's like, I want to kiss my crush.
That's true. It is monkey's paw, but at what cost? And it's the cost of humanity, and that's right when he comes and he wakes up. So I like that reading. I'm gonna patent it if it's not already patented, and I will give it. It's tough, but I don't want to be left out on the side of the road. It's just such a well done movie. I'll give it a soft yes as well. So,
all right.
All right, guys. I appreciate you both being soft. That was very polite. That one I can be hard. Yeah, this is a great. Real quick though, I'm glad Kirk brought that up because I do love like the low key sleaziness of Donald Sutherland's character, just shitting on this girl's boyfriend, just saying like all these shit things, and clearly like obsessed with this woman, clearly like having a huge crush on her. And it's just like, dude, what are you doing? Just like
eating that stir fry. It feels so adulterous. It's like, you're already like, it's already over.
Yeah, it's like done subtly enough that it's believable, but it's still just like very clear like what he's doing, and I like, and actually I do like that because it adds a little texture to the movie. Like, it'd be easier to make him just a straightforward like good guy. This feels a little more real, like this is a real guy you would know in the world. I also imagine that, I don't know if this is characters are like this in the book or the original film, but I imagine that this film was written by a resentful health inspector whose girl was taken by a dentist, and who also had a thing about psychiatrists. So
yeah,
a lot of anti-dentist material and psychiatrist material in this film. Yeah, hardcore, big time. Yes. I love this movie.
All right, cool. I got to say then, since it's the end, one is, yes, I feel like none of the characters are exactly good people. Like, they're all kind of like shitty in their own way. But I will also just say too, for Kirk, from what I remember of the book is very different from this movie. The kind of basic premise is there, but the book is much more optimistic and much more hopeful about humans resisting. So maybe that's where you need to find your source for this material. But enough is said. We'll move on to the nominations, in which these three will nominate a movie, and I'll decide which one to pick for us to watch next week. So Tony went least recent. So what was the order you would like?
I'll go Kirk, Connor, and then me.
Kirk, before you
go ahead.
Last time, you claimed to have a very good film stockpiled. Is this the day? What's going to happen? Are you going to save it? Let's see.
I don't want to put pressure. Oh, fuck you, Tony. I don't want to put pressure on you, Anthony. And you may have a sneaking suspicion what it might be. Here's the thing, guys. I've been wanting to rewatch this film for about 3 years, and I'm very close to doing it. And I want this rewatch to be with this podcast. And the movie I am speaking of is none other than I Origins. I want us to watch this fucking masterpiece of a film. Anthony, I feel like you're my best shot. No obligation. I will just continue to, as the pods, I will find someone else to snatch, and I will switch them out, and I will get this in, or at least I will get this a chance. But if you feel like it this week, then you feel like it. But no pressure. I will say that it's not do or die. But yeah, I Origins basic premise. the soul is accessed through the iris, and I think Michael Pitt is some sort of eye research. He's like a genetic researcher, right? And he like cracks the code of like the Jungian human experience of like reincarnation. That's all I'll say. Okay.
I'm just gonna say real quick. At some point, I'm gonna make a supercut of all the times Kirk has described the plot of I Origins when he's pitched it. There'll be like a dozen.
Yeah, I guess.
Michael Pitt is like, and he has a beard. He's an eye researcher.
Okay. The next time I won't have to describe it. I'll just say refer to episode blank.
Okay. Ruin my fun, huh?
All right.
I'm having a hard time picking. Fuck it. I feel bad for doing it. I gotta go. If Kirk can go I Origins again, guys, it's time. How long has it been? What, 4 years? 3 years? That I promised I would recommend this movie again, that I swore it would get in and have a chance on the podcast. I'm talking about the greatest animated film of all time, 1999's Iron Giant. Let's do it. It's time.
All right. So we got 2 renominations, Tony. So I hope you know that means you got 2 choices here. You got Mishima or I Origins. Which one are you gonna...
We all do I Origins. It's just we coerce you. Actually, I'm gonna give you a choice, Anthony. I'm giving you 3 years. You're gonna tell me which year you want: 62, 94, or 2000.
All right. Well, 94 is the year I was born, so let's just go there.
All right. I just rewatched this movie, and this is a big one. This is a big one that we've never done, and it's we try to avoid the super obvious ones, but I kind of want to do an episode on Pulp Fiction because we've never done a Tarantino movie, and I rewatched it the other day, and it just like I'm just like damn, I forgot about it. You know, like I take it for granted. I took it for granted, and I think sometimes we take it for granted, and I want to do an episode on it so we don't take it for granted anymore. And that's all I'll say for now.
Do we though?
All right. Rebuttal, Anthony. What do you think? What are you leaning towards? These are all great choices. What are you thinking?
All right. So I'll be open and honest here. Before the rebuttal, I got to say, if Connor remembers when he first nominated this, I was also the host. And as I told him, I hate the Iron Giant. I couldn't stand it as a kid. I couldn't stand it when I rewatched it as an adult with my niece about 5 or 6 years ago. So maybe this would be the time, or maybe, you know, he'd have the arguments there that I finally see what I'm missing. But, you know, I always love doing something different, and an animated film is always, you know, something that we don't always agree on. So that could be interesting. Tony has quit and left, so there's that for his movie.
If he's not here for the rebuttal, I think he automatically. Oh, okay.
Okay. I'll give the quick thing then. Is Kirk's movie is a complete mystery still, other than Michael Pitt. And I've heard the synopsis so many times, but I don't know if it sticks to me, you know. But also, as I told he had to say Steve Ewan is in this movie, and that would knock it up a few points. So there's that.
Well, that's part of my rebuttal. Yeah, go ahead.
We had many posters of Pulp Fiction in our dorm room, in every wall. I don't know if, you know, I feel like I've seen it enough times through that, but I don't know. Let's hear some rebuttals.
As far as Pulp Fiction, I mean, next week I'm going to suggest we watch the episode where we look at John Belushi in a college sweatshirt. That'll be a good one. And then the Wu-Tang Clan the next week. Pulp Fiction, excellent movie. I actually would prefer to do a different Tarantino. I think it's more our style to be a little off the beaten path with some of these directors, but maybe it's a good mix-up. Obviously, we know what we have with Pulp Fiction. I, for one, don't think it's underrated. If anything, I think it's slightly overrated, but maybe I just haven't seen it recently enough. Connor's Iron Giant, you know, I think I may have seen it, but I really don't really remember it very much. I think I was such a Disney fanboy that anything outside of Disney, like Iron Giant isn't Disney, right?
I don't think so.
The animation. Yeah, I'm like
quite sure it's not Disney, but I don't remember what
DreamWorks. Yeah,
I was like Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Lion King. That was my Yeah, exactly. But I will say in I Origin's defense, Anthony, there's a woman in this movie. She's French. Her name is Astrid Bergès Frisbee. I mean, does that not sound like an Anthony girl to you? Because it sure as hell sounds like one to me.
Okay, to the listeners who can't see what's happening, Anthony's eyes became like cartoon eyes. They're popping out of his head. His heart is like bumping out of his chest.
The Eiffel Tower appeared in his eyes.
There may or may not be a Brooklyn rooftop party. Anthony, this movie is so up your alley. It's ridiculous and it's cheesy, yeah. But I think you'll be able to rise above the cheesiness and extract the meta narrative and appreciate it and hold it and kindle it for what it is. And you'll see Michael Pitt in a new light. And here's my final word. This will evoke a reaction from all three of you, as well as from me, the likes of which we have not seen in quite a while. So that's what I'll say.
You're saying a bodily fluid will leave our bodies. You just won't say which one.
Correct.
Okay.
There's what, 4 or 5 choices? I don't know.
There's a lot of
All right.
options. Think about it.
I gotta say before Tony goes though, is there's this really interesting tactic that's popping up over the last few times I've hosted, is to suggest the actress or the lead in the movie is an Anthony girl, and to see if I fall for it. You know, Connor pulled it with Renee Ryder. Kirk is pulling it
How could
again.
I not?
So, Tony, is there someone not Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction that you're gonna try to
Audrey
sell me?
Tatsu. No, there is a French woman, Bruce Willis's girlfriend. I guess. I don't know. But I would never, Connor, I would never pander to your lust like that. I'm a principled man, Anthony. I guess I don't have anything really to add. I kind of agree with Kirk. Actually, I understand. Like, yeah, my inclination generally would be to go for like, you know, Jackie Brown, or I don't know. Jackie Brown's kind of the obvious, like not obvious one, I guess. But like, I don't know. Like, I just really like Pulp Fiction, and I think it's good sometimes to do like a really big, really obvious movie, because we don't do it generally. Sometimes it's good to like kind of mix it up, because that is mixing it up in its own way. And I think it would be fun to revisit a movie like that, a movie we've all seen and probably have opinions on, but maybe haven't seen in a little while, and kind of see, what do we think about it now? How does it relate to other movies we've seen, that stuff that it's influenced, you know, or stuff that it influenced it that maybe we've watched since we first saw Pulp Fiction? Like, where does it sit now? Because it's a movie a lot of people see when they're like in high school, and it like blows their minds. And I think it's interesting because it's a movie that, like, okay, people see it in high school, it blows their minds, and they put the poster on their dorm room wall, and they're like, and that's their favorite movie, and a lot of people never move past it. So I think in a way, Pulp Fiction's almost become stigmatized in like film circles. It's almost seen as like the dumb guy film bro choice, or kind of just very basic. And I think that's a little bit unfair. It's fair and it's unfair. But I think it's worth exploring that. And also, what is this film bro thing? What is this canon of like the film bro movies, and why is this the king? Why is this the number one?
We're all try-harding so hard right now. I love it.
All right.
And sorry, I didn't rebut. If Kirk is worried about, you know, watching animated movies like Beauty and the Beast because it's for girls, I can assure you there are no girls in Iron Giant. There's a giant metal man. There's cool fights. There's this whole like army thing going on. And I think, Anthony, you'll love it because libertarianism, you know, the thought of Ayn Rand is just woven into the very fabric of this film. I think you'll find it eye-opening in that respect. Yes, as in all of Brad Bird's films.
Well, wait, it's about a robot discovering he's a giant gun, right? Basically,
something like that, yeah.
A giant dick, Kirk.
Did
So
you
it's
spoil it? Is that like the ending where he like blows himself up?
Kirk, I watched this like 35 years ago.
Okay, fine.
That's sort of the thematic crux. Yeah.
It's my
of the film, I would
Ulysses.
say.
You've ruined it.
But I'm excited to watch I Origins.
All right, so let's see. I like this image that's like forming of me, because not just like the pandering to like the female actress part, but also all of a sudden Connor's throwing out like as if I'm this like Ayn Rand fascinating, you know, figure. No, okay. Let's see. This is a tough one. I'm gonna start by eliminating Brad Bird's Iron Giant, because
Okay.
I was really hesitant and not wanting to do Tony's film, but he did make a good case, so that's interesting to me. I also haven't seen Pulp Fiction since late high school, I think right before college, so maybe something there. But I didn't even like it much at the time. So I don't know how much more I'd like it now, and I don't know if I'm ready for that. I also, even still, I maybe would prefer one of the bigger ones. So there's that, or a different one, I should say, not bigger. Kirk's film is the complete mystery, and so that's the fun part. So, what the hell? Do Kirk's film finally, so we could cross it off. Was Kirk's the one that we did in the 50th episode that we promised we'd watch?
No.
Atlas.
It's Cloud Atlas.
Cloud Atlas. We have to watch on
I thought we were
episode.
crossing that off, but still, I'm not going to go back. I Origins it is. We're all going to fall in love with Michael Pitt and Stephen Ewan next week.
This is I apologize for taking this podcast hostage. I did it with good intentions. Michael Pitt is a better Leonardo DiCaprio, as I will tell you next week. Actually, that's false, but he's still great. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for your belief. And Michael Pitt thanks you.
Yep, and I'll
I
have
can't wait.
he's having.